as I've emphasized over and over so far in this series, the way you approach Revelation matters greatly. It matters greatly. How you understand what you're reading is immensely important. And so, like I said, we're going to review a little bit this morning, and we're probably going to review a lot throughout this series because it's really important. Now, Revelation tells us right at the very beginning, in the first few verses, exactly what it is, and tells us how to read it. It's right there. And it tells us, John tells us right in the beginning that it's an apocalypse, it's prophecy, and it's a pastoral letter. It's apocalypse. It's an apocalypse. Now, apocalypse, once again, isn't destruction. It doesn't mean end of the world. It's a Greek word that means unveiling, uncovering, a revealing. That's what it says right in the very beginning. This is an apocalypse of Jesus. An apocalypse of Jesus. It's an unveiling, an uncovering, a revealing. And it's a type of genre. It's a type of genre. Revelation, as apocalyptic literature, uses cosmic imagery to unveil, to uncover, to reveal Jesus and this unseen reality. This type of literature is not meant to be taken literally. It's not meant to be taken chronologically. That's not how you read apocalyptic genre, that apocalyptic genre, the apocalyptic literature. Revelation also uses Old Testament imagery, the backstory of the Old Testament, to shape the message of Revelation. So it's an apocalypse. It's also prophecy. It says right there in the beginning, it's a prophecy. And it's not predictive prophecy, it's instructive prophecy. By far, the majority of prophecy in the Bible is calling God's people towards greater faithfulness. Greater faithfulness. It's not predicting future events. Revelation is a word from the Lord about the Lord. It's meant to evoke a response from God's people. It was useful. It was applicable for the first century churches, right? At the very beginning, once again, at the very beginning of Revelation, it says, John says, that all who hear the message and keep it, do something with it, apply it, will be blessed. It's instructive. But it's also a letter, an epistle, a pastoral letter. So in order to read Revelation responsibly, we should read it like we would read all the other letters in the New Testament. The letters in the New Testament were written to communicate a specific message to a specific audience in a specific location, specific time period, language, culture. In other words, there is a context for the New Testament letters, and there's a context for Revelation as well. Revelation was written to 7 specific churches in Asia Minor in the first century during the rule of the Roman Empire. Revelation uses the story of Rome, the story that Rome was telling about themselves, their imperial political propaganda, and through apocalyptic imagery, completely undercuts, subverts, undermines that story, and specifically undermines and subverts the Roman civic religion. We talked a lot about that last week. We'll talk more about that today and as we go throughout this series. We have to understand the context of the letter in order to understand the message to the churches in the first century. And then we can better understand what our takeaway is for today, churches in the 21st century. David De Silva, who's the associate professor of New Testament and Greek at Ashland Theological Seminary, he says that there are three myths that people believe about Revelation. Myth number one, I want to share these with you. Myth number one is that Revelation is about us. Think about this. Can you imagine how many people have read Revelation, studied Revelation throughout the years? How many countless people have read Revelation? Think about it. I mean, different types of people from different cultures, different backgrounds, from various parts of the world, facing various kinds of circumstances, right? Can you imagine if everyone thought that Revelation was about them and how the message may be different depending on their context and their circumstance. There's a context to the letter, and that context isn't our context. So we have to keep that in mind. To believe Revelation is about us is a myth. De Silva also says, number two, that Revelation, the second myth is that Revelation is about our future. Once again, the prophecy of Revelation was meant to elicit a response from the churches, the first century churches. And at times, this is really important too, it helped them catch a glimpse of a cosmic future, helped them catch a glimpse of an ultimate future in order to challenge them to live faithfully in the present. And it should do the same for us. So to believe Revelation is all about our future is a myth. Myth number 3, Revelation is written in a mysterious code. Remember, Revelation is an unveiling. It's an uncovering. It's a revealing. It's not meant to be a mystery. It's not meant to be a mystery. It definitely wasn't a mystery to the churches in the first century. They would have understood exactly what John was saying. It was presenting a very clear message for the time in which they were living. In fact, the message it was conveying would have been so clear that a non-Christian, a non-believing person, someone who had no idea who Jesus was, could have picked up this letter and read it and understood what was happening in the letter. They would have understood, and they probably would have been blown away by how subversive the message was. Probably would have said, wow, I can't believe you're saying these things about the Roman Empire. I can't believe that you're saying these things about the emperor and the gods and the goddesses of the Roman Empire. So to believe Revelation is written in a mysterious code is a myth. Now here's the thing. This is not the way the majority of American Christians read Revelation, right? This is not how we read and understand Revelation. The majority of American Christians would believe that they would believe these myths. And we talked a lot about this a couple of weeks ago. I received a text message this week from someone, and I just want to read part of it because this is a copy and paste of something that I see floating around on social media. It's all over the place. I'm just going to read part of it. This person says, I won't even pretend I understand all the book of Revelation, but I do understand quite plainly that I do wish to spend eternity in heaven. I have been hearing about the second coming of Christ and the events unfolding since I was a child. The mark of the beast, artificial intelligence, microchips, no cash, digital currency, total government dependency and control. When we are raising a family, working long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, lots of things go unnoticed or just get ignored. No one can comprehend how bad it will be, but we see it happening. We see it happening bit by bit on the news every day. While the devil is preparing people for the Antichrist, God is preparing people for the rapture. Here's another article that I read this week. This is an interview of a very, very prominent, well-known pastor. I'm not gonna mention who it is, but like I said, this is just from this past week. The Bible tells us in the end times that Israel would be isolated and ultimately she would be attacked from her neighbor to her north, identified as Magog. Magog is a term that appears several times in the Bible, notably in Ezekiel 38 and in Revelation 20. Magog represents modern-day Russia and what he sees as the prophetic significance of Russia's war in Ukraine. So according to this well-known pastor, Revelation is about us in our times and our future. He also talked about the Hamas attack on October 7th and says that this is another reason why he thinks the end is near. He says, my appeal to all my Christian friends, I appeal specifically to pastors out there to speak on this topic Talk to your people about it. It's important that we love the Jewish people and that we support the nation of Israel. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, we've been closer. Obviously, we've been closer than we are right now to the Lord's return. And in my view, the next event on the prophetic calendar is the rapture of the church, which could happen at any moment. Now, here's the thing. I've heard these messages over and over and over and over again throughout my lifetime. This is what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. This is what the majority of American Christians, and it's primarily an American type of perspective. This is the way I was raised. It's probably the way many of you have been raised if you've grown up in the church. And this is called dispensationalism. And once again, we talked a lot about this a couple of weeks ago. Now, besides the fact that this is a fairly new perspective, it was something that was developed in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. We talked about that. And besides the fact that the idea of a rapture originated from a dream that a teenage girl had around the same time, and that it's actually not found in the Bible at all. We talked about that as well. And besides the fact that dispensational theology spread throughout the United States through mass media, books, movies, music, hymns, study Bibles. We talked a lot about that a couple of weeks ago. Besides the fact that it's not the historical perspective of the church, once again, we talked about that. Besides all that, this viewpoint disregards the genre of Revelation and disregards the context of Revelation, which isn't a faithful way of studying the Scriptures. It's not how we study the Bible. It's not how we approach any of the other books in the Bible. So when you disregard the genre and you disregard the context, you usually miss the message. You miss the message that's being communicated. And you read things into the text that aren't really there. So, yeah, these texts, these articles, they're all over the place. You'll see them everywhere. And I've heard the same message over and over and over and over again throughout my lifetime. And they're fear-based messages. I can remember growing up in the 70s and the 80s and hearing the same exact thing all the time. And here's the message. Whenever something terrible takes place in our world is falling apart. Our world is such a dark place. The end is near. You hear that all the time, right? I've heard that since I was a little kid. I've talked about this before, but we just can't imagine the world in the first century. We really can't imagine. I mean, what's going on today does not compare to the darkness and the violence and the oppression in the first century. I mean, these little house churches in Asia Minor, probably made up of like 12 to 15 people, they received this letter. They heard this incredible revelation to them, and many of them took it to heart, right? They did exactly what John said. They kept it. They took it to heart. They applied it. They actually did something with it. And in the midst of an incredibly dark, oppressive, powerful Roman Empire, they overcame. They prevailed. And here we are today, talking about it. And I firmly believe that we can do the same today in our dark world. We have to understand the message. We have to understand the message in order to keep it, in order to take it to heart. We have to do something with it. And that's what we're going to attempt to do throughout this series. Now, as we continue in this series over the next few weeks, we're going to see that the message for the seven churches was, first of all, it was a message of comfort. A message of comfort. For those facing difficult circumstances, for those suffering, and for those being persecuted, it was written to bring comfort. Comfort. While at the same time, it was a critique. It was meant to bring comfort to the churches, but it was meant as a critique of the Roman Empire. To undercut and subvert the story that the Roman Empire was telling about themselves. It was meant to undermine the story that they were telling about the emperors and their gods and their goddesses. So comfort as well as critique. We're also going to see that Revelation was also written to challenge the churches that were compromising and participating and assimilating with the ways of empire and its civic religion. So a challenge, while at the same time presented a huge contrast. Challenge the churches, and in challenging them in how to live in the midst of empire, presenting a huge contrast between the two. Between the power of the emperor and the power of Jesus, a contrast between the empire and the kingdom of God, between those who divide their allegiance and follow in the way of empire and those who faithfully follow in the way of the Lamb, the true king. So, comfort, critique, challenge, contrast. These are just some of the messages that we're going to learn throughout this series when we understand the genre and when we understand the context. We keep those things in mind, and we avoid some of the common myths that we've been taught about Revelation. So last week we looked at chapter 1. Incredible chapter, incredible way to start off Revelation. It starts with a vision of Jesus, who he is and what he has done, what he continues to do. A vision of Jesus among the lampstands, among the seven churches. A vision to encourage them to follow in the footsteps of the faithful witness. And now when we turn the page to chapters 2 and 3, chapters 2 and 3 in Revelation are specific messages to the seven churches in Asia Minor. And the way that this is written, the way that Revelation is written is so creative, and it's so purposeful, it's so intentional. These specific messages to the churches in chapters 2 and 3 are connected to the rest of the book. So some of the images that we find in chapter 1, these images of Jesus in chapter 1 that we looked at last week, they show up again in the individual messages to the churches in chapters 2 and 3. And then the messages to the churches in chapters 2 and 3, they come to fulfillment at the end of Revelation, chapters 21 and 22. We see some of the things again at the end of the book of Revelation. There's just this incredible unity, this incredible flow to the book of Revelation. It's all connected. But now, futurists and dispensationalists see a separation. They see a separation after chapter 3. So for them, they say after chapter 3, after the messages to the churches, they see a rapture taking place. And we talked about that already in length, and I don't want to beat a dead horse. So what they see is that the most of Revelation, the rest of Revelation until the very end, doesn't pertain to the churches at all. It doesn't pertain to the Christians at all. However, in doing that, when they do that, they miss the whole point. They miss the message that is being communicated. In chapters 2 and 3, the churches are instructed to persevere, to stay faithful, to be victorious, to conquer, to overcome. Over and over, they're instructed to do those things. How in the world are these little minority groups of Christians meeting in homes supposed to be victorious? How are they supposed to conquer? How are they supposed to overcome in the midst of such a powerful, oppressive Roman Empire? How in the world are they supposed to do that? The rest of Revelation shows them how. The rest of Revelation shows them how to overcome. And that's so important. And if we disregard the genre and we disregard the context of Revelation, we completely miss this important message. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to skip chapters 2 and 3. And I'll let you know why here in a second. We're going to skip chapters 2 and 3. Today we're going to look at chapter 4. And then we're going to move forward throughout Revelation. We're going to move forward through Revelation, and we're going to see the answer to that question. You know, how are they supposed to overcome? We're going to see the answer to that. And we're also going to see, once again, as we move forward through the chapters of Revelation, we're going to see this huge contrast. It's purposeful, it's intentional. This contrast between the ways of the Roman Empire, Babylon, and the ways of God's kingdom, between the ways of the emperor and those who worship the beast, follow in the ways of the dragon, and those who faithfully follow in the ways of the Lamb, the true King. We're gonna see that as we move forward in these chapters. And then we're going to come back to the messages to the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3, and I think we're going to have a better understanding of the context, what they were called to, who they were called to be in the midst of Babylon, in the midst of the Roman Empire. And so that's where we're headed. That's our plan over the next few weeks. Now, last week, we talked about this epic story that Rome was telling about themselves. We talked about how they believed that they had a God-given destiny to rule the world, that through the greatness of Rome, the entire world would be ushered into this golden age of stability and security, prosperity and peace. We talked about how that peace was accomplished, though, right? That peace was accomplished through conquest, through might, through power, through military might. That's how the peace was accomplished. And there were reminders of this story, this Roman story, everywhere. Political propaganda was everywhere. And this became a civic religion that spread throughout the empire. And there were temples and there were shrines and there were monuments in honor to the great Roman emperors. And these became places of worship. And all 7 churches that John was writing to had these civic sites of worship right in their midst. And there was more and more and more political pressure for Christians to participate in these worship practices, to devote themselves, to show honor and allegiance to the empire, even for very practical reasons. So last week we're also introduced to Domitian, who many believe was the emperor at the time Revelation was written. And throughout the series, we're actually going to talk about a couple of different emperors during the time. But Domitian was called Lord and God. He demanded to be called Lord and God. He was called ruler of the conquered world. He was called the world's sure salvation. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about Emperor Domitian, and then we're going to read chapter 4. So in Ephesus, one of the locations of the churches, one of the churches John was addressing, there was a temple devoted to the worship of Rome and its emperors, and these were all over. But there would be priests that would serve in the temple. These priests serving in the temples were dressed in white robes, wearing wreaths, crowns on their heads, with golden bowls of incense that they would use, they would pour out in worship. So these priests worshiping in the temples dedicated to the emperors, dressed in white robes, wearing crowns, using bowls of incense. These priests would worship the emperor through singing and through playing instruments. And outside the Ephesian temple was a 20-foot statue of Domitian. This is what it looked like. Below the statue were smaller statues of the Roman gods and goddesses. And so the message was clear. Domitian, the Lord and God, stands above all other gods. That's the message. Domitian instituted these Roman imperial games that would happen every 4 years. And so archaeology has uncovered a lot of this stuff, and specifically uncovered these reliefs in works of art that show depictions of these imperial games. And in these works of art, that you see Domitian seated on his throne, holding a scroll, kind of like he is here. A lot of the artwork show the emperors holding the scroll. They have the power. They have the future in their hands. Those who lost in these imperial games were depicted as lying prostrate before his throne. Now, we showed one of the coins from this time period. Last week, I want to show you another coin. This coin depicted Domitian on one side, and then on the other side was a lightning bolt coming from his throne. Just a mighty display of his power and his godlike might. Whenever Domitian would arrive in a city, people would flood out. They'd flock to meet him, and they would lay on the ground. They would lie prostrate in front of him, and they would cast their wreaths, the wreaths that they wore on their heads, at his feet. Are you getting the picture here? Do you understand what's happening here? Here are words used to describe the emperors of Rome. These are Roman words: glory, holy, thou alone are worthy, Lord of all the earth. An ancient Roman hymn declared, "Worthy are you, O Domitian, O Son of God. Worthy are you to receive honor and glory and riches and blessing." Let me read that again. "Worthy are you, O Domitian, O Son of God. Worthy are you to receive honor and glory and riches and blessing." This is the world the seven churches of Revelation lived in. This was all around them. They were completely immersed in this stuff. Now, with that in mind, let's hear the message to the churches from Revelation chapter 4. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." He gets a vision of heaven. John gets a vision of the throne room of heaven, the real throne room, right? He gets to look into heaven's reality, to see what's actually going on. He gets to see who's actually in charge of the world, who's actually running the entire cosmos. And this would have reminded John. Remember, John's a Jewish man. It would have probably reminded him of Exodus chapter 24, when Moses was invited to come up here. That's what it says: "Come up to me and experience the presence of God and receive the law of God on Mount Sinai." And it probably would have reminded him of all the other heavenly throne room scenes in the Old Testament. Here are just a few. Isaiah 6, 1 through 5, Ezekiel 1, 4 through 28, Daniel 7, 9 through 14. Those are other throne room scenes, just like the one in Revelation. And I would encourage you to copy these down or take a picture or whatever and read these throne room scenes sometime this week. "At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne." Now, throne is a really important word. Throne appears 43 times from this chapter through the rest of Revelation. We see the word throne. And throne is used 19 times in chapters 4 and 5 alone. 19 times. This is really important. When we think of Revelation, we should think of throne and the worship of the one true God. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white, had crowns of gold on their heads. So some think that the 24 elders represent, possibly the 12 tribes of Israel from the Old Testament, plus maybe the 12 apostles from the New Testament, which ultimately, would represent all believers, Jews and Gentiles together, the people of God throughout history, the kingdom of priests, the true kingdom of priests that has already been talked about here at the beginning of Revelation. These kingdom of priests dressed in white. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder. Is this reminding you of anything? In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits, or the 7 sevenfold Spirit, or the complete, this picture of the complete, the fullness of the Holy Spirit of God. Also in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center and around the throne were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings that covered their eyes all around and even under its wings. So, I mean, this is sort of strange, right? I mean, these strange creatures. And so at the throne we see that there are elders. We see that there are strange creatures, probably representing all living creatures. So here at the throne, you've got all peoples, all nations, all empires, all creatures, all of creation, worshiping and giving allegiance and honor to the one true God. The one true God, all of creation, giving worship to the one true God and saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And a holy means different, means set apart, completely other. Triple completely other. Holy, 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 right? There's no one like him. There's no one like God. He is the one true God. No one compares to him. No one compares. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, these are Roman words. These are words of empire and emperor worship, familiar to John. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, O Domitian. You are worthy, Domitian, who's the Lord and God? No. You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power." Why? Why is God worthy? For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being. This revelation is just amazing, and it completely undermines the story of Rome. Completely undermines the story that Rome was telling about themselves. And here's the thing, it completely undermines any other story that competes for allegiance and devotion to the one true God, the one true Lord and God. Any other story. So what are some takeaways? I mean, there's some amazing things in here, but here are some of my takeaways. There have always been, and there will always be, phony gods, right? And counterfeit kingdoms competing and vying for our allegiance. There will always be other gods and kingdoms vying for the throne of our lives. And so with an unveiling, an apocalypse, a revelation of the one true God, comes an unveiling, an apocalypse of something else. An apocalypse of the heart. Some questions that are really challenging that I think we need to ask and we need to answer. Who or what's really on the throne of our lives? Who or what's really on the throne of our lives? Who or what's really on the throne of our churches? Where might our allegiances be divided? Really challenging questions. How do we know what's on the throne of our hearts? How do we know who or what's on the throne? Well, we show our allegiance by how we spend our time, how we use our money, or maybe how our money uses us, what we think about, what we hope and long for the most, who we spend our time with, And then those are just some of the things that may reveal divided allegiances. What about this? When it comes to our world, our society, when it comes to our country, do we demonstrate God's sovereignty? Do we demonstrate the fact that we know that He's ruling and reigning? He's the one that's ruling and reigning. And do we truly believe that? Do we really believe that He's ruling and reigning, that He's on the throne? Or do we communicate fear, worry, lack of hope? Is that what we're communicating? Because our neighbors, our friends, our family members, our coworkers, our classmates, our kids, our grandkids, they're watching. The world is watching to see if God's really on the throne of our lives by what we communicate and how we live. Are we putting our trust and hope in a political candidate or a political party? I think people would say, well, no, of course not. Some would probably say, yes, of course we are. Many would say we're not. But what are we communicating? It may be revealing who and what's really on the throne of our lives in our churches. Do we care more about advancing an earthly kingdom and empire? For some, it's the kingdom of America. For some, it's the American kingdom. Or are we living wholly and fully for God's kingdom and advancing His kingdom alone? His kingdom alone. God's kingdom, listen, God's kingdom is completely different, and it's completely separate from any other earthly kingdom. And as we're going to see in the next couple of weeks, His kingdom advances in a completely different way. A completely different way from any earthly kingdom, empire. So, is your allegiance divided? Important question. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to read Revelation 4 again. And we're going to sing together. We're going to take communion together. While we're reading Revelation 4, while we're singing, I want us to just spend some time just reflecting on these questions. What's on the throne of our lives? Really? Who or what's really on the throne of our lives? And who or what's really on the throne of our churches? And are there ways that our allegiance is being divided? An apocalypse, a revealing of the one true God, a glimpse into His throne room, the throne room of the Creator God, will always subvert, undermine, and undercut all counterfeit gods. All counterfeit gods, all counterfeit kings and earthly kingdoms, along with the stories they tell. Always. So let's be reminded that all phony gods and all earthly kingdoms will pass away, but it's only God's throne. It's only God's throne. Only His rule will last forever. His is the only enduring kingdom. And He's the only true Lord and God. So why divide your allegiance?